In this video, we apply the tools and techniques that we've learned in the last few videos toward converting examples of line angle formula and/or condensed structural formulas and/or Lewis structures amongst these different ways of drawing organic molecules. If you realize that you are rusty on drawing line angle formula, then take a look at video number 308, where we walk through that step by step. Similarly, if you're feeling weak in drawing condensed structural formulas, video 307 is where to look for more advice on that. And video number 305 and 306 go through the process of drawing Lewis structures. So let's go ahead and dive into an example problem here. In this example problem, we are asked to convert the line angle formula that we see on our screen into a Lewis structure and a condensed structural formula. In my opinion, when converting line angle formulas into Lewis structures or condensed structural formulas, it doesn't matter which of those two you work on first, Lewis structure or condensed structural formula. The techniques that we will learn here are similar for both. So taking our line angle formula, I'm going to convert it into a Lewis structure first. Remember that Lewis structures, by definition, show every single bond, every single atom, every single lone pair electron, and every single formal charge on every single atom. And in the case of drawing a Lewis structure for the molecule that we see up here, there are no formal charges shown in the line angle formula, and what that means is that there are no formal charges in this molecule, period. So we don't really need to worry about drawing in formal charges. If they were present, it would be necessary they be shown in the line angle formula, so nothing to worry about there. In the case of lone pairs, remember that with line angle formula, lone pairs are implied throughout this structure rather than shown explicitly, and so we may very well have some lone pairs that we need to add in as we go through. Certainly we have some atoms that we need to bring in, because remember that line angle formulas show carbon atoms as the ends of the line, like we have out here and right here, and the bends in the line like right here. So therefore, we will have some atoms that we need to bring in, and certainly some bonds as well. So let's go ahead and draw out this very detailed structure, our most detailed way of representing a molecule. I'm going to start at the left-hand end of the molecule. As I've said in earlier videos, it doesn't matter which end of the molecule you start with, just pick one and roll with it. So at the end of this line here, when I'm dealing with converting line angle formulas into Lewis structures, one of the things I like to do is sketch on the line angle formula to help keep myself on track with this. There's no shame and no harm in taking this material that we've been given, this line angle formula, and sketching out here that I would expect there to be a CH3 at that end of the line, because the end of the line represents a carbon unless something else is shown, and it's implied that that carbon has to have a full octet formed by hydrogen atoms. So that carbon, to have a full octet, has 3 hydrogen atoms bonded to it because it already has one covalent bond coming to the other carbon. So coming to the next carbon, that's the bend in the line right here. This carbon has 3 lines going from it already, meaning 3 covalent bonds. And therefore, to fill in the 4th spot there to make its octet, it needs 1 hydrogen atom, and we fill that in like so. Coming up to the top here, we have another end of the line. That would be represented as a carbon atom. To fill the octet on that carbon, since it has 1 covalent bond already, it would have 3 hydrogen atoms there. Sketching on along, we come to a bend in the line right here that has to represent a carbon. To fill its octet, it already has 2 lines coming from that carbon, and it needs 2 more filled in. So we're going to do a CH2 here. Coming to the next spot right here, this position would represent a carbon because that's a bend in the line, or an intersection between different lines is another way that you could look at it. This carbon already has 4 covalent bonds going to it because we have the 2 to the oxygen, 1 coming over here to the left to the carbon, and 1 to the right to the nitrogen. So that has a complete octet, nothing to worry about there. Then we have our nitrogen in place, and remember that when we have heteroatoms such as nitrogens or oxygens, any hydrogens that are bonded there have to be explicitly shown. So we can know that there is no hydrogen bonded to this oxygen atom up top. There is a hydrogen bonded to the nitrogen there. And then coming out to the end of the line right here, that would represent, at the end of the line, if there's nothing else filled in, it means there's a carbon there. To fill the octet on that carbon, since it has 1 black line covalent bond there already, it needs 3 more. Those 3 more have to be hydrogen atoms. So with this sketch work done, I'm now going to translate this into the Lewis structure beginning at the left-hand end of the molecule with that CH3. To show a CH3 in a Lewis structure, we draw a carbon and we draw 3 hydrogen atoms coming from it. Since there are 4 groups in total bonded to this carbon atom right here, since there's just single bonds there, I space those bonds as far away from one another as possible. So I draw lines to the left and right, up, down. So these are all spaced apart as far as they can be. As we go from there, the next spot is coming to here, and I'll go ahead and do some highlighting here to represent who's who. So we had our first carbon of the CH3 group, also known as a methyl group there, that we've put in blue. Next position in line, I'm going to put in green, and that represents the carbon atom right here. And that particular carbon was directly linked back to our left to the CH3 carbon, which we see here. It's also directly bonded to a CH3 up here, which I'm going to go ahead and draw in. So go ahead and get that knocked out of the way. So that's our CH3. I show that. And just to make my life as easy as possible, since it points upward here, I'm going to show it as pointing upward here as well. You could have pointed it downward, to be honest, and it would be the same structure because that CH3 is bonded to the exact same green carbon that it was up here, and molecules can freely rotate. But to keep it as simple as possible, if there is such a thing as simple in chemistry, we're going to point it oriented upward to match what we have done up here. So that's our CH3, filling in my hydrogens onto that carbon so that that carbon assuredly has a complete octet. We go like so. And I'll fill that in with our carbon atom right there. Now, coming along down the chain, we come to our next spot here. That's right here with our CH2 carbon. And I'm going to fill in that carbon and highlight it in yellow. That yellow highlighted carbon was connected directly to the green highlighted carbon. This carbon is a CH2 as we saw above to fill its complete octet. So I'm going to show those 2 hydrogens. I'm going to show them up and down. You could have shown them to one of them to the right and one of them up, or one of them to the right and one of them down. Doesn't matter as long as the correct atoms are bonded somewhere within this range of the 4 positions there that this carbon in yellow is connected to. So we got the 2 hydrogens there. Then we come over one more spot. Coming over one more spot, we have our carbon right there. That particular carbon I'll show here, and it's highlighted in pink. That carbon is directly connected to an oxygen by a double bond. So we'll go ahead and fill that in. Oxygen by a double bond. It's also directly connected to the right here in our image to a nitrogen. So I'll go ahead and fill in that nitrogen as well. There's our nitrogen. That nitrogen is connected to a hydrogen. We see that hydrogen in black explicitly in our structure up top. So I fill that in here as well. And then that nitrogen, following on down the chain, is connected to a CH3 group. So I draw a line between the nitrogen and the carbon, draw my 3 hydrogens directly bonded to that carbon, like so. And then going back in and highlighting just to color code to finish this off, there's our CH3. The carbon from that corresponds to the carbon in green right here. So all of my color coding matches as we come through the chain, CH3, CH, and I'm missing the hydrogen there, so that's why I'm going back and double checking here. Up top, we saw that that was a CH right here, so it has to be a CH down here as well. And furthermore, as we're looking through this, we need to double check that things meet the octet rule, and it wouldn't meet the octet until that hydrogen is added in there. Yellow, CH2, matches the yellow CH2 up top. CO with a carbon-oxygen double bond matches down here. NH matches the NH up here, and the CH3 matches our CH3 up top. So now we have in our Lewis structure accounted for all of the bonds being shown, and we've verified that we have an octet on all of the atoms that need it. In other words, everything except for hydrogen gets a complete octet. Hydrogen, on the other hand, just gets 1 covalent bond to satisfy its valence. We have all the atoms shown, yes. And then the last remaining piece of the puzzle is that we need to fill in the lone pair electrons. We could do that by going through and calculating how many lone pair electrons are needed on each atom so that it has no formal charge, or we could remember from our video about calculating formal charges on atoms and common ways that atoms arrange. That was video number 304. That in order for our carbon to have no formal charge, the carbon needs to have exactly 4 covalent bonds, which is the case for every single carbon within this molecule already. Oxygen atoms will have 2 covalent bonds and 2 sets of lone pair electrons. We have a double covalent bond here to take care of the covalent bonds, and then we're going to need 2 sets of lone pair electrons as the route to have an oxygen atom with no formal charge. And then we come over to the nitrogen here, and we learned that nitrogen, if it has 3 covalent bonds, which it does, and a lone pair of electrons, that is its route to having no formal charge. So we fill in the lone pair electrons based on what we know about what is required for each of these common atoms to have no formal charge, with the carbons acknowledging that they all need 4 covalent bonds in total. Nitrogen will have 3 covalent bonds and a lone pair. Oxygen has 2 lone pair sets and a double covalent bond. There are 2 covalent bonds, in other words. So this is going to finish up our Lewis structure for this molecule. We can also draw for this structure, as we're asked in the directions here, to draw a condensed structural formula. So let's go ahead and do a condensed structural formula. Drawing out the condensed structural formula, we can look at either the line angle formula or the Lewis structure, because we should be able to take either of those types of structures and convert them into a condensed structural formula. Remember that in a condensed structural formula, what we are aiming to do is we are aiming to condense down most of the bonds to make those implied, where we'll show all atoms within the molecule, including the carbons, hydrogens, oxygens, and nitrogens in this case, but not explicitly show bonds unless they are double bonds or unless they are bonds that go up or down, not as part of the continuous chain through the molecule. So when we talk about the continuous chain in this molecule, what I would recognize as the continuous chain is this backbone right through here. And so as we connect those atoms together, we can avoid drawing the lines that connect through here to make that skeleton of the molecule in this condensed structural formula. So let's go ahead and take a stab at drawing this. So at the left-hand end of the molecule, we have a CH3 group. That's going to correspond to our carbon atom right here in blue. So carbon in blue. Then our next spot is our CH. That is the carbon right here in green. So we'll go ahead and fill that in like so. And that particular carbon is connected to the carbon in yellow that's a CH2. So I'll go ahead and fill in CH2. And we'll show that in yellow just for color coding. So the yellow here matches the yellow here on the CH2. Since it's H2 next to that carbon, it's implied that those hydrogens are bonded to the carbon. Then we come over a spot to this carbon that is in pink. So I'll go ahead and fill that in as just a C. And I'm going to highlight that as pink to match the pink that we have over here. Then that carbon is directly connected to a nitrogen. So I'm going to go ahead and fill in N for nitrogen. And that nitrogen is directly bonded to a hydrogen. That's what we see in gray there. So I'm going to fill in the hydrogen as well. So I'm going to put NH, and I will go ahead and color code that by highlighting it in gray. And then coming on down the chain from there, we have our CH3. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in as simply CH3 at the right-hand terminal of this molecule. I'll highlight it in green to match the color coding that we have been using previously. Now that takes care of what I have highlighted or circled in yellow through the spine of the molecule here. Now we do have some additional features to contend with, namely, what we haven't included in that spine are some so-called branches coming off. Rather than this CH3 group that I've circled in green following this chain here, instead it comes off in the opposite direction of that longest parent that is coming through the molecule. And so we need to deal with that. How we deal with that is we recognize that that branch that comes off of this chain and circled in yellow is coming off, in this case, in the upward direction, we could show it in the upward direction as a line coming off of our condensed structural formula at that point. So the second carbon in the chain here, the green carbon, if we're counting from left to right, the green carbon right here is the one that has that CH3 coming off of it. So I'm going to map that over here as CH3 coming off of that particular carbon, the second carbon of this chain if we're numbering from the left-hand side. So that CH3, I'm going to circle in green over here just as a reminder of where that originated, was the CH3 right here. We've accounted for these various hydrogen atoms along the way as our CH3 and CH2 and CH groups there. We do have, additionally, this oxygen that's part of a double bond to carbon. That was the fourth carbon in line from the left. It was a carbon that was in pink. That's the carbon right here in our condensed structural formula. And so since that C-double-O bond is not part of the chain and it's a double bond rather than a single bond, we have to show that explicitly. So I'm going to show that like so and show my oxygen there. Remember, with condensed structural formulas, the lone pairs are implied, so I'm not drawing lone pairs onto the structure there. It doesn't mean that they are not there in reality in nature, but it means that when we're drawing this to save time, we've omitted those. But we need to keep in our mind that there are actually lone pairs there in reality, in nature, or in a chemical bottle in the lab. So that takes care of our oxygen atom that's double bonded there like so. And then taking a look at this structure, dotting all our I's, crossing all our T's, we can confirm that we do indeed have the correct number of atoms here, particularly carbon atoms. It's a good idea to double check your count that you haven't omitted a carbon atom, because especially when we have these branches coming off of the main chain, it's awfully easy to forget and leave one out. So we've double checked that we have that there. And this is going to give us our condensed structural formula, where rather than showing lines connecting all of the atoms to string them together, instead we've condensed it down where it's implied that there will be lines connecting these groups and that the hydrogens have to be bonded to carbon to fill the octet. But we've condensed it down, making this long chain through the molecule, and then we're just showing groups that aren't directly part of that chain as lines coming off, or in the case of double bonds or triple bonds, we have to show those explicitly because it's implied that everything else through here is a single bond instead. I will make you aware that there is an additional way to go about showing this condensed structural formula. It condenses it down even further. You don't have to do this, but you should be able to interpret this type of information if it's given to you, and that is at the left-hand end of the molecule, we have two CH3 groups that are bonded to the same carbon atom. Both of these CH3 groups are bonded to the same exact carbon. And when that is the case, there is a way to break this down even further, and that is that we can put CH3 in parentheses and put the subscript 2 there to indicate there are two CH3 groups directly bonded to the adjacent carbon, in that case the carbon right here, which I'll highlight in green there to represent that, and we'll highlight both of the two methyl CH3 groups there in blue. So in blue we have the two CH3 groups, so we have CH3 parenthesis 2, and the fact that that CH3 parenthesis 2 comes right before that carbon in green indicates that both of those CH3 groups are directly bonded to the carbon, like we show up here, or like we show in the Lewis structure that I'm highlighting, that region of the molecule over on your left. So from there we would just sketch out the rest of the molecule as we had before. Our CH group was connected to a CH2, connected to a carbon that's double bonded to an oxygen, connected to an NH, and connected to a CH3 to cap that off at the end of the molecule. So this strategy that I've shown here, you should be able to recognize and interpret if you see this kind of information within a molecule, that indicates that whatever comes immediately before or immediately after the stuff in parentheses, it indicates that those two CH3 groups are bonded directly to that carbon atom there. And you have to take some liberty here in looking at these structures and saying to yourself, okay, how can I make the complete octet filled here at this carbon? And really the only way to do it is to have the two methyl groups bonded there, so that then you fill the octet by having this hydrogen in red bonded to that green carbon, and then the CH2 group also bonded to that green carbon there. So with that, we have explored how to convert line angle formulas into Lewis structures and or condensed structural formulas. And as you continue your journey through organic chemistry, it is really critical to be able to interpret any of these types of structural drawings and convert from one type to another, because different applications will require a level of understanding that goes along with any of these three types of structures.